Nigun Tishrei for the high holidays. Yai dai yai yai dai dai hiri dai 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 da da dai dai hiri dai 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 yai dai dai hiri dai 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 ya da dai dai hiri dai 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 ya da dai dai hiri dai 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 ya da dai dai hiri dai 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 ya da dai dai hiri dai 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 ya da dai dai. Got that now? Hitty die 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 hitty die 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 yada die die hitty die 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 yada die die hitty die die yada die die hitty die 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 yada die die. One more time, friends. Hitty die 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 hitty die 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 yada die die hitty die 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 hitty die 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 yada die die hitty die 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 yada die die. Shalom, shalom, friends. Thank you for joining me in the Nigun. I've been feeling that Nigun pretty deep lately, and the power of positive affirmations. We live in a world with negative reinforcements all around us. We are inadequate. The world is broken. The world is burning. There is chaos and division, and we can internalize that stuff and feel like we are bad, the world is bad, people around us are bad, really negative thinking, and to realign ourselves and observe our experience, observe the experience we're having, and on a deeper level, feel the spiritual joy that comes with the deeper purpose of our lives, and that we are measured not by what we do, but by who we are, each of us created in the image of God. So I know we lost a bunch of folks for this one because of the time change. So they're going to catch up on the recording. So I do apologize. The next 3 weeks, this week and the next 2 weeks, we will be starting at 11 out here in the West. Those who are joining in other time zones, that would be 2 Eastern. But then we will go back after 3 weeks, back to the 10 a.m. slot. So just some scheduling difficulties there. So I thank you all for those of you who were able to adjust to be with us in this time zone. So friends, here we go. And actually, hi, Barbara. I know that Barbara, you were able to join now because it is 11. So we'll get Barbara for 3 sessions. And some of you also can join more easily. So, friends, Miraked. We're going to talk about Miraked. As always, we have different relationships to the Lamed Tet melachot. We're not saying anything prescriptive here around how we should live our Shabbat life. There's lots of different ways to think about Shabbat, but rather using it as a jump-off point for some deeper philosophical and Jewish values ideas. And then we're going to grapple with your questions, thoughts, so that we can, generate some ideas together. So here we go. We're already in the ninth malacha, the ninth dimension of work, where we look at the process of sifting, Miraked, which mirrors the sifting that was done in the tabernacle when flour was readied to make bread, or when a sifting-like action was done in the herb preparation process. Herb, whichever you prefer. The malacha encompasses sifting or straining using a sieve or a filter. In modern Shabbat observance, traditionally, one might traditionally avoid making coffee with a French press or straining excess salad dressing from salad. This malacha, like the other malachot, concerns separation. It is about removing the undesirable from the desirable, like we've talked about in the past. In the case of this particular malacha, the separation is put into effect specifically by the use of a utensil, as opposed to what we saw earlier around using the wind or using one's hand. Stepping back to observe the fact that sifting is just one among many other agricultural processes reminds us to be grateful for how labor-intensive food production truly is. Here's a cool Talmudic passage we're going to look at from Brachot, which you should see on your screen here about Ben Zoma. Yeah. So here's what Ben Zoma says. What they say about Ben Zoma. Ben Zoma saw a multitude of Jews while he was standing on a step of the Temple Mount. He said the bracha, "Blessed is the sage of the secrets." And then he recites, "Blessed," there's the whole bracha that we know, Baruch atah Hashem, blah, 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 who created all those who serve me. And then it goes on to explain, he used to say, how many exertions did Adam, the first person, make until he found bread to eat? He plowed, he sowed, he reaped, he gathered, he threshed, he winnowed. He selected, he ground, he sifted, he kneaded, he baked, and afterwards he ate the bread. But I, Ben Zoma, rise early in the morning and find all these labors prepared for me. Now you could read this as arrogant, right? He's standing on the Temple Mount being like, oh, those low commoners, those workers, they are here to serve me so I can just eat my bread. But the other way to read it, and it doesn't have to be one or the other, is a gratitude blessing. He's like, wow, these workers do all these things that I'm removed from, right? Think about the necessary workers that we talk about today, farm workers and the like. And I just go to the store and buy bread, or today, if you're like me, you just open your front door after you made an online purchase and it's just sitting there. If it hasn't spoiled in the heat already over the last hour, it was sitting there already, right? And you're like, oh my goodness, Baruch Hashem, like I could just open my door and the bread there. Of course, you had to get the money from your work. You had to go online and order it. You had to open the door. You got to quickly get it in your freezer or whatever, right? But it's like an amazing thing. And to step back and look at these processes that emerge. And this is one way to think about the modern economy and the interconnected global marketplace, that actually we can fill ourselves with gratitude for the hidden dimensions that produces what we bring to our table, and not only feel spiritual joy by that and empathy through our interconnectivity, but also a responsibility for all those who are involved in such a production process. Okay, let's keep going to our next source. Now, of course, sifting is helpful not only in an agricultural process, but also in helping us find a lost object. This is from the Rambam, from Maimonides. He says, when a person sees a dinar, that's a currency, fall from a colleague into sand or into dust and escape the colleague's vision, it is as if it fell into the sea or into a river and it belongs to the finder. For the owner despairs of its recovery. It's called Yeush. Yeush is a traditional category, which means they have despaired that they will ever find it again, since it does not have a mark by which it can be identified. Even if the person saw the original owner bring a sifter, right here, sifting, to search for the lost dinar, the owner is considered to have given up hope. He is searching out of wishful thinking, as would other seekers who search in the dust, although they have not lost anything, and the hope that they will find what someone else has lost. The owner is searching in such a manner, it is not that he has not despaired of the recovery of his money. So here we see the idea of Hashavat Avedah, that in the mitzvah of Hashavat Avedah, returning lost objects, we are to indicate anytime something has a clear identification. There is a watch with an engraved name in it. There is an object which is unique. We should do all we can to find the owner. But if there is an object which could never be identifiable with an owner, you find a $20 bill in the street, There's no way to claim unless the person put their name on it or something, or can claim my dollar bill said X, Y, and Z and a marker on it, right? That it is actually theirs, but rather it is something that we can put into the category of yeush, of despair. One will never find what was distinctly theirs. This emerges around, you see these feel-good stories like once a year, there's a homeless fellow and someone dropped their engagement ring into the homeless fellow's cup. And next time the homeless fellow sees this person, he runs over and gives them back the ring. These amazing stories of people going to great lengths to return lost objects to people. Nonetheless, this idea of sifting, this idea that the Maimonides brings here of sifting through objects in order to identify that which is lost. If you think about the beach, on the beach, there's the guy with the metal detector, right? Or the process we might go through as a form of sifting. So we can wonder, however, whether we should act lifnim mishurat hadin. Lifnim mishurat hadin means above the letter of the law, by returning an article that has been so thoroughly lost by its owner that the owner cannot sift through a world of objects to locate it, right? We might say, okay, it is beyond the amount of time that's reasonable that they should expect to find it, and it's unidentifiable. And yet, what would it look like to go beyond the letter of the law, that we have done our process of sifting and we find something that we can still somehow get to someone who may have lost it? The way we search for lost objects help us to think about how we all view the world around us. We hold within ourselves notions of subjectivity to avoid viewing the world outside ourselves as a conglomeration of objects upon which we act with attention only to our own interests. At the same time, we can also ask how people might themselves undergo a kind of sifting process. In particular, we can consider how we distinguish or sift those people with whom we have an affinity from, quote unquote, the other. How often do we judge others? Do we engage in racial profiling in a destructive way to let most pass through the gates, but filter out others who look more suspicious to us? Indeed, do we go so far as to sift with a utensil, as the halachot of Miraked tell us not to do on Shabbat, in some sense, when we help perpetuate systems to differentiate among people unfairly, leading to systemic racism? Are we similarly at fault when we succumb to the inherent racism that we all must recognize in ourselves? Here's an interesting verse I saw in the book of Amos, in the Tanakh. It says over there, Amos 9:9, "For I will give the order and shake the house of Israel through all the nations, as one shakes sand in a sieve, and not a pebble falls to the ground." So here, in what we might identify as a problematic fashion, we similarly see the idea of sifting as a form of punishment, or filtering out the sinful from the pure. Here we might see, and we can understand historically why this would be the case, through persecution and oppression and anti-Semitism, why the house of Israel is pure and the other nations are impure, and God is going to use this sieve to sift out the house of Israel from the nations, right? Some hold a notion of Jewish supremacy in a messianic era in their theology, that God will bring the pure Israelites to their place of hierarchy, and the goyim, the nations, will be sifted through and thus punished for their lack of recognition of the Jewish truth. Now, I think we can have a very healthy vision of potentially of Jewish chosenness, a potentially healthy notion of Jewish ideas being the ones that resonate most deeply, or even be the most true theologically. Maybe you don't agree with what I just said, but we can still hold such beliefs that there are ideas in the marketplace of ideas that we hold to be more true. We're not relativists in our ideas, and yet not condemn other nations or other faiths, or hold that they are sinful and need to be proven true by God. And so this notion of Amos here, you can imagine being very therapeutic in a history of oppression, where Jews are considered to be sinners for believing what we believe. and understand that there will be a theological rectification to come without it leading to such an extreme. Now let's get into some Kabbalah. Who's ready for Kabbalah? So here we see some positivity in the act of using a sieve, as opposed to the negativity we just saw. Okay, so profiling or the idea of sinners. Let's look at the positive idea of sifting, because that's always what we're doing here, the positive and negatives in the concept. It's never one way. So in the writings of the Kabbalist Rabbi Yehuda Ashlag, if you haven't read any Ashlag, check him out. He's a really interesting guy around Tikkun Olam, how he uses that in a mystical sense. Here's what Ashlag has to say about the idea of the Creator positively sifting through humans, right? We just saw a potentially negative idea of God sifting through humans. There's the pure and the impure. There's the sinners and the non-sinners in a binary fashion. Here's Ashlag. And this is the key to an understanding of the incapacity of so-called world reformers. I love that idea. The world reformers, mitakne olam, right? Those who engage in tikkun olam, the mitakne olam, the world reformers that arose through the generations. For they saw a human being in the image of a machine that is not working properly and needs repair. They need a tikkun. This means to remove the corrupted parts and replace them with others that are fixed, metukanim. And that is the whole tendency of these world reformers, to eradicate anything bad and harmful in the human species. And the truth is, were it not that the Creator was standing against them, they would certainly have already enough time to sift humanity like a sieve, and to leave only what is good and useful. But because the Creator watches over all the elements in the divine creation with such great care, no allowance is made to destroy a single thing in God's domain, but only to turn it and transform it to be good. This is a really important idea in Kabbalah and later in Chassidut, that God creates everything for a purpose. Nothing can be destroyed from that divine creation. It can only be turned and transformed to good. This goes back to the idea we keep talking about, that there's no such thing as a bad emotion. Every emotion is valid. If you've engaged in therapy, you probably are familiar with this idea, that every emotion is valid. It's just the emotion that we sit with, that we hold, right? That emerges for us. We don't need to label it as a bad emotion. Rather, it exists there. We see it, we name it, we observe it, we hold it, and then, Kabbalah, we turn it and we transform it. We own it rather than allow it to own us. We hold it rather than be held by it. So too here as well, in trying to repair the world, there is human nature. We can't destroy human nature. Some people think we can, but rather we can turn it and transform it and channel it. Curious if you want to disagree later when we get to chatting about this. Indeed, it is not only Shabbat that reminds us of the work of sifting, but looking up at the moon does as well. Whoa, how do we get to the moon? My kids love the moon. We look at the moon. They always want to know, why is it big today? Why is it small the next day? Why does it look this shape and that? It's awesome, and it's awe-inspiring. So if you're not familiar with the process of Kiddush Levana, here we're going to look at the Talmud. Around Kiddush Levana, let me say something before you read that. Around Kiddush Levana, Kiddush Levana is sanctifying the new moon. And let me read this and then I'll unpack it. Rav Acha ben Chanina also said in the name of Rav Asi, in Rav Yochanan's name, until what day of the month may the benediction over the new moon be recited? Until its concavity. Is that how you pronounce that? Concavity is filled up. And how long is that? Rav Yaakov ben Idi said in Rav Yehuda's name. I love that. They love to quote each other, because it says in the Talmud that if you give credit to someone for the idea you're quoting, you help to bring the Messianic era. You don't just have the chutzpah that every idea is yours. You quote people. Who did you hear this from? So they're always quoting each other. 7 days, he says, in the name of him, in the name of him. Then the Hardian said 16 days. Now both agree with Rav Yochanan, but the one explains it as meaning until it is like a strung bow. The other until it is like a sieve. That's why I brought this idea here, because it's another case in the Talmud of applying the notion of a sieve, when the moon looks like a sieve. So here's an interesting idea, by the way, the difference between Sephardic Jews and Ashkenazic Jews. I suspect we all know the difference, but just as a reminder, Ashkenazic Jews are folks, well, I guess we can identify it by color as well. What we generally think of as white Jews who come from Eastern Europe, or really most of Europe, and have the dominant narrative of the Shoah and the Holocaust, and then the Aliyah from from European oppression into Israel or into America. And then there's the Sephardic Jews who are Spanish or Eastern, North African or Mediterranean, oftentimes Jews of color. Of course, there's other Jews of color who might not necessarily be Sephardic in their origin, and there's a lot to say about that. And Sephardic Jews in the tradition tend to bring more subjectivity into qualitative measurement. Ashkenazic Jews tend to be much more quantitative. That's for various reasons. The Mediterranean region tends to be more poetic, more artistic. Again, these are overgeneralizations, but if you look at the ideas that emerge from such regions, Ashkenazic Jews or Europe in general tended to emerge more philosophically, more mathematically, more in the ideas of systems rather than just in the realm of experience. And so do we say that we can bless the moon up to a certain number of days, or do we use a shape to identify it? Now, of course, this idea predates the cultural differentiation of Ashkenazic and Sephardic, but the idea there is an interesting question. Do I stop blessing the new moon based on the shape of the moon or based on the number of days? So anyways, here's basically how it falls down in Ashkenazic tradition, that you can bless the new moon starting on the third day of the new month, right? We're in Elul now, and so the third of Elul, you can start blessing the new moon because it's big enough, and you can do that up until the 15th. Which is when you have a full moon. So you want to be in that zone of the moon increasing in size, but not yet a full moon. And so here they're talking about the strong bow or the sieve. Anyways, interesting stuff. And I love this bracha. If you don't do it, try it out. Go outside on a night where it's not yet a full moon, before the middle of the month, and look at the moon, feel the awe of the creation, and then engage in the chidush, the kiddush levana, sanctifying the process of renewal in our lives and our relationship of our personal renewal to the renewal of the cosmos. Okay, keep going. I'm sorry, sometimes my presentation is like 10 minutes and sometimes it's like 25, 30 minutes. So I've got just a lot to share today. So some people love longer presentations, some people love longer conversation. So apologize if you're in the mode of shorter presentations. Okay, here we go. Also, the Shemitah year, the sabbatical year. Again, I advocate that everyone should get a sabbatical year to rejuvenate with their family and their learning. I don't think I'm going to win that one. But if I won't win that, then I advocate that every post-college student should spend a year in service. Mandatory year in service. Go serve in the Army, go serve in the Peace Corps, go serve in America, or go teach in an underserved school. We should require a year of service. If you disagree with me, let me know also. I would love to hear your thought on that, but I would love to rebuild a culture of service in America. Okay, also, so the Shemitah year and the justice-focused message in the traditions that come with the idea of the Shemitah year are very relevant to how we think about a sieve as well. Here we have a source we're going to look at from Gittin. Here's from Gittin. This is kind of a weird source, but I'm bringing sources where the idea of a sieve plays out or sifting comes out in different ways. A woman may lend to her neighbor suspected of transgressing the sabbatical year law a fine sieve or a coarse sieve or a hand mill or an oven, but she must not sift nor grind with her. I'm sure you all have this dilemma every week. Your neighbor knocks on the door. Remember the olden days when people would knock on your door asking for an egg? I know as a kid that happened all the time. I don't know if we change, maybe that still happens to you, but I don't know if we change how we think about neighbors or if we change how we think about eggs. But in the good old days, we would knock on each other's doors for eggs. So anyways, they knock on your door. You ever have this problem every week? They knock on your door for a sieve. They need to borrow your sieve. So you can lend it, but you can't sift with them, it says over here in the Talmud. The wife of a fellow may loan to the wife of an illiterate man a fine sieve or a coarse sieve, and she may winnow or grind or sift with her. But when she pours out the water, she must not touch it with her, because they must not assist such as commit transgression. And all these have they enjoined for the sake of peace. And they may encourage Gentiles in the sabbatical year, but not Jews. And they may offer them greetings for the sake of peace. So this is, it may see, again, all this Talmudic stuff, it's really hard sometimes to understand in our modern terms. But they're dealing here with complicity. If you have a justice principle that we're going to let workers rest for a year, we're going to let the land rest for a year, we're going to let animals rest for a year, what do you do when your neighbor doesn't abide by that? when are you complicit, morally complicit, Jewishly complicit, by assisting them in their process of continuing to go about business as usual when we're trying to create a national ethos of unification? What do we do when everyone will take the vaccine to get herd immunity and one person won't? What do we do when that happens? When the nation of Israel wants to embrace a sabbatical year and there's people who won't do that? When we're trying to combat racism, but there are people who will not comply and will even speak out publicly against those who name it, and want to tear down the agitators who want to name the corruptions and the evils that we see in society. What do we do with such tensions? And so there's those who say, live and let live. It's a libertarian ethos. Let everyone do as they please. And there's others that say, yes, live and let live, but I won't be complicit in what they're doing. Here they're struggling with, okay, I will do this with my neighbor for the sake of peace. I'm going to lend them this, but I can't do it with them because that's too complicit. I want to be a good neighbor. I'm not going to protest them, but I also am not going to participate in what they're doing. So this is interesting. We're all going to have different conclusions of how to be a good neighbor, where does Jewish unity stop and personal integrity begin, right? Where does Jewish pluralism stop and my personal, ideology sticks in? I know people who feel, I am egalitarian. I will not pray in a synagogue where women are not treated equally. That's a limit on my pluralism. That's an absolute for me. I know others who say, I will only pray in a place where people are observant of the Shabbat, and I will not pray in a place where that's not a value, and that's the limit on their pluralism. So everyone's navigating these tensions. Okay, let's keep going. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov thinks about sifting in our internal obligations to work on the spiritual side of our psyche. So now we're moving from the Talmud to the spiritual psychic realm of our spiritual work. Here's what Rabbi Nachman of Breslov says in Likutei Maharan. In just the same way, you must carry on searching until you find another good point. Okay, we quoted this idea last week, but we quoted it on a surface level, so I want to actually share it. He's talking about someone who's in a very lowly state, they're very depressed, and how they, through their own spiritual work, can pull themselves out. Here's what he says. In just the same way, you must carry on searching until you find another good point. Even if you feel that this good point is also full of flaws, you must still search for some good in it. And so you must continue finding more and more good points. This is how songs are made. So let's give an example. I'm a terrible parent. I'm a terrible parent. I'm a terrible Jew. He says, whoa, 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 that is a thought error. You need to observe your experience and step away. And yes, of course you're a flawed parent. Of course you're a flawed Jew. Of course we're flawed in everything we do. We're human beings. But step away, see all the good you did or do as a parent. See all the good you do as a Jew or as a human. See all the good in yourself. Don't fall into the thought error of saying, I'm always, I'm never, I'm bad. In essence, music is made by sifting the good from the bad, he says. Sifting the good from the bad. The musician has to find the good spirit and reject the bad. A musical instrument is basically a vessel containing air. The musician produces the sounds by causing the air to vibrate. Their task is to move their hands on the instrument in such a way as to produce good spirit, good vibrations, while avoiding the bad vibrations, the dissonant winds of gloom and depression. When a person refuses to allow themselves to fall into despair, but instead give themselves new life by finding and gathering their positive points, this makes melodies. They can then pray and give thanks to God. He says we turn away from God because we feel inadequate. We feel low about ourselves. But we can start to pray. We can start to sing by joining together these musical notes, by joining together this spirit. Brian Wilson was a Kabbalist. By joining together this spirit of goodness, which again doesn't look past flaws. We're in the month of Elul and Teshuvah. We want to work on our flaws. But part of the way we work on our flaws is by positive affirmations, reminding ourselves of our goodness, the goodness of the world. We can't just read the news that says the world is terrible, the world is burning, or we can't just read our detractors that say, oh, you don't agree with me here, you're awful, right? Or our inner detractors that say, I am inadequate, I'm not good enough. We have to find the good, build from the good, right? And do that for our partners, for our friends, for our family members. Point out the good in them, help them to build this good. Let's keep going. We're almost to the end here. Rav Kook deals with sifting in regard to how we think about our ideas, our beliefs in particular. He says, Knesset Yisrael, which means the community of the Jewish people, is the distilled essence of all existence. And in this world, with this distillation, is devolved into the Israelite nation, truly in its materiality and spirituality, its generations and faith. And the Israelite history is the idealized distillation of general history. And there is no movement in the world, in all the peoples, whose like is not to be found in Israel. And its faith is the sifted essence of all beliefs, all the source from which idealism and the good flow to all the beliefs, and thus necessarily the force which distinguishes among belief concepts until it bring them to the level of clear speech, so that all may call out in the name of God, and your Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel, will be called Lord of all the earth. So here we see Rav Kook dabbling in the idea we saw earlier, a problematic idea of sifting such that it leads to a hierarchy where Jews are on top. But we know from Rav Kook's universalism that he rejects that and knows there's good in all. And yet he thinks here what some might call ethnocentric fashion, but I think we can see a deeper layer here, that we as Jews should feel proud and see that our faith is the sifted essence of all beliefs, which are connected to all beliefs in the cosmos, which are connected to all beliefs of the nations, the interconnectivity in it, and love our own faith, our own good, our own self-worth, right? We shouldn't fall into self-hatred as Jews because of oppression, and we should feel good about ourselves and our own role in redemption, and see that that sifting process can lead to a purity of ideas that doesn't have its impurities still there, but a purity of ideas in what we've inherited. Okay, one more idea, and then we're going to open it up. From Pirkei Avot, of course, one of my favorites. Sifting is something we see here to find intellectual clarification. Here's what it says in Avot. Perhaps this is probably the most famous Jewish idea, certainly Talmudic idea, that has to do with such a sifting process. There's 4 types of students. I think about this a lot in pedagogy. 4 types of students that sit before the sages: a sponge, a funnel, a strainer, and a sieve. A sponge, which absorbs everything, right? A funnel, which lets in from one end and lets out from the other. A strainer, which lets the wine flow through and retains the sediment. And a sieve, which allows the flour dust to pass through and retains the fine flour. Okay, now bracketing an extreme case where we think someone is perfect and has the perfect truth as a teacher, if we put our student, our child, into a learning environment, we don't want them to be a funnel, right? Which basically anything that goes into their head, into their ears, stays in there, right? They have no deciphering process. A funnel just accepts everything they hear, right? We know people like this, that anything they see on the news is thus truth, or anything they hear from someone is truth. We also don't want to be a strainer where the good passes through and the bad stays there. Sorry, I skipped over sponge. Sorry. Let me start over. A sponge absorbs everything. We don't want to be a sponge. Then a funnel we don't want to be, which just absorbs nothing. Everything passes through. I said that wrong. I'm sorry. A sponge absorbs everything. The funnel, everything goes through. It absorbs nothing. The strainer lets the good pass through and only maintains the bad. And then the sieve is the ideal. The sieve is the idea here that the good remains and that which we don't want passes through. That's what we want in Jewish learning. And here, friends, is what I would argue should be an authentic Jewish approach to modernity. The Haredi approach says, modernity is bad. Reject modernity. It's all secular. It's all liberal. It's all anti-Torah. It's all anti-Semitic. Reject it. Modernity's bad. Separate yourself. Build higher walls. The secular version says, assimilate into modernity. Ugh, tribal Judaism. Who wants religion? Completely immersed. The newest idea is the best idea. The newest fad is the best fad. The newest way to be woke is the best way to be woke. Right? Just say the newest thing and assimilate into that. And you don't want to hold on to anything of the past. And then, friends, we see how we would want to educate our children and our grandchildren, how we ourselves, I think, want to embrace modernity, where we think critically about what emerges. Is this a good message or a bad message? What in this film do I agree with? What do I disagree with? What in this news do I disagree with and agree with? What in this politician do I agree with and disagree with, right? What in this also in this Jewish text, that's part of modernity. It's not only what do we accept outside of Judaism, but also within Judaism. I'm not going to be a fundamentalist. What here is a good message from this text, and what am I going to reject? Our faith also needs to move into modernity. It is a critical approach that we take to text and to modernity on both ends. So friends, here we'll wrap up. We are to be like a sieve. In sifting, we can gain clarity. Who is in and who is out, right? In not a judgmental way, but in a moral concept of how we think about extremes. What is in and what is out in terms of the marketplace ideas? We can see differences more clearly when we separate one concept or one object from another. But in seeing those differences, how will we judge them and how will we decide? Okay, friends, I'm sorry for the long presentation. That was way too long. I'm going to pause here. Don't forget to unmute yourself as you want to share a comment or question or thought. I'd love to hear from you. If you're talking, you're on mute still. Never be shy. Please don't be shy. Are they able to unmute themselves? I assume you are.
Holy.
Hi. Hi, Cheryl.
Hi. That was really interesting. We say a lot of times, though, that our children or our grandchildren, and this is a complimentary way, we say, they're sponges. They hear everything, they soak it up, and that's complimentary because they're retaining everything. So I understand why you're saying that that's not good, because then they're devaluing. They don't have the methods to devalue or disagree with anything that they've learned. But as far as a sieve and a strainer, a sieve, I understand why you're saying. I'm not exactly sure what the difference is. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Oh, wonderful. Cheryl, I appreciate that so much. Thank you so much. Because I think that we have to bring in Piaget here and developmental stages. There are different stages to childhood development. And I think there is a childhood stage where we want our children to be sponges. Our job as parents and grandparents are to put them in environments we trust and then expect them to be sponges. We put them in a religious school program, a Sunday school program, or a day school, or whatever, or a family Passover experience. We want them to soak up everything. We don't expect a 3-year-old or a 6-year-old to be a critical sponge, to challenge their teacher as wrong, to challenge their parent as wrong. I mean, later that's going to come. In the teen years, they're going to have total rejection, right? Likely. And that's also going to be healthy. That total rejection is going to be healthy as well for their process of differentiation from their parents, right? If your children don't reject you at some point, you've done it wrong, one might say. And yet there's going to be another stage, right? Hopefully by the time we're sending them to college, they're in a stage where they are able to critically think. Now, we know we can fall into thought patterns which are unhealthy, where someone can say no wrong or someone can say no right. Now, of course, there are extremes where there are probably people who can say no wrong and say no right. But in general, how do we promote this? So I think you're right. I think that in the earlier childhood stage, we can only expect children to be sponges, and our job is to put them in the right environment. And our job is also to what's the phrase that they say? Rather than what's it called when you indoctrinate someone?
Propaganda.
Yeah, propaganda, but you brainwash. Thank you. So the opposite of brainwash is, what do they call it? Brain vacuum or brain dry? Brain dry. So what they say is, let your kid be a sponge, and then when they come home, you're going to brain dry them or brain vacuum or whatever it's called. Basically, let them absorb it all, and then you're going to help them suck out the parts that aren't good. So that's the way. Yes, please go ahead.
So then the parent or grandparent acts as a sieve.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. That's a great way to say it. Exactly. That our children's job is to be a sponge, and then our job as a grandparent or parent is to then be the sieve for them. Yeah. Do you agree with that? Do you agree with that, Cheryl?
I think so. Either that, or you put them in you have them in a vacuum situation where
Yes.
everything that they absorb as a sponge is what you want them to absorb.
Right. Now, the challenging thing about immersive experiences, we know Jewishly that the most successful Jewish experience for children and adults are immersive experiences, right? That's the power of Birthright Israel. That's the power of summer camp. That's the power of retreats for adults. Yitz Greenberg lost that war. Yitz Greenberg thought we need more retreats for adults. I would love with the funding to have VBM retreats where we go away as a community and learn immersively. The funding isn't available for that. But I think he's right, and all the data is right. Immersive is works. But the problem for kids is that just as they are sponges to the good, they learn Birkat Hamazon. They love their Jewish identity. They love Jewish socialization. They also absorb things that are really, really hard to remove, right? Things that might be low self-esteem, that might be a Jewish idea we want to reject, either because it's a fundamentalist idea or because it's a secular idea, right? They're going to absorb things from their peers, which are hard to reject. So this parenting thing is really complicated. Thankfully, I'm in the stage of little problems still of, we didn't bike for long enough, or he popped my water balloon, or
And Shmuly,
hi, Eileen. Yeah, hi.
I would say that the children only become critical thinkers after college, probably when they're in their late 20s, because up until that time, they are immersed in themselves and immersed on all of their experiences, and they are funneling, winnowing, sieving in order to arrive at what they feel is their value.
Well said. Thank you. Good point, Eileen. Thank you. Someone else?
Hi, Rabbi. This is Eric. Thank you very much for this lesson. This has been very informative. I wanted to ask you, you talked already a little bit about the sieve, and I wanted to ask, you gave some great examples where as a child, Jewish learning, maybe, it's okay to be a sponge, but as you're older, the shift towards the sieve. I'm wondering if you've seen other examples in Jewish learning where the sieve is still, where it's not like to maximize like how to learn Jewish learning. If it's not the sieve, it's through another. Is there circumstances where maybe sieve isn't the right way? Maybe it's a different approach. Whether it is like immersion, like when you're going to Israel and you're doing whether it's your yeshiva, or if it's strictly like if it's like a certain kind of Jewish practice. It's something else. I'm just kind of curious because like I found it fascinating with the evolution from sponge to sieve, but I'm figuring not every evolution is the same.
Yes, right. Okay, that is a really great point. And if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to just think for a moment. Okay, yes, absolutely. So here it is. I think that this plays out in spirituality. That in spirituality, here's the problem for us modern people, or one of them. We have trouble immersing. We are skeptical, right? How do we immerse? If you've ever seen Haredi Jews pray, not all of them, but a lot of them are so fervent in their belief that they have no question that what they're doing is true. And so the power of a spiritual immersion is so rich. Now, there might be flaws in that. For us, there might not be. Now, for modern people who say, is there a God? Does God hear my prayers? Does this prayer work? And I have all these questions and skepticism I bring. I'm now unable to immerse in shaking my lulav and etrog, unable to immerse in the sukkah, and able to immerse in kol nidre, unable to immerse in the Pesach Seder, right? I can't immerse because I have these questions. Am I being too Jewish? Right? Is this true? Is this good? Now, that skepticism is good and healthy intellectually. But I like to say that our spiritual lives and our intellectual lives should have a separation. That what we do in Jewish learning should be different from what we do in Jewish practice. When I think about prayer, I should bring skepticism. When I engage in prayer, I should almost pray, now you might disagree with me here, almost pray as an absolute believer without those questions, right? Because that's the only way I can immerse. So that's the first thing I want to say, that this is not about, going to camp or going to Israel. There are these big experiences we have where we can allow ourselves just to experience it, don't have to be critical, right? But then I think the things that happen daily are Jewish spiritual practices, where we can step back and think about them after. But when we're in them, we should immerse in them in a way where we are like sponges. We allow ourselves just to absorb what happens in them and then allow ourselves to unpack it after, right? Imagine if we went into a sermon, because we might hear a sermon in the coming month. Rather than going into it saying, is this a good sermon or a bad sermon? Is the choir doing a good job or a bad job? Right? Is this voice beautiful or not voice? Take off the judgment, take off the critique, just immerse in the experience. Okay, on your car ride home or whatever you're doing, walk home, you could say, let's think about that. Did that work for you? Was that good for you or bad for you? But in the experience, just be in it. So that's something I want to say over there. Now, I'm sorry, Eric, I didn't answer your question because you didn't ask, what do I think? You asked, in the sources, is there another idea that promotes the sponge-like experience?
Or where the last one isn't the most effective or the best approach.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why I guess I was more caveat to say, because in the fourth, you were saying the fourth one is the best one, and I do agree with that. I just would imagine there are circumstances where that may not be. There might be an alternative approach.
Yes, right.
That's
okay. Actually, yeah. Here's another idea. V'ahavta l'reyecha kamocha. You shall love your fellow as yourself. Now, what that means to love a life partner means you love their good and their bad. Now, tell me if you all disagree, because this is really maybe a high level of love. Or love a child. You don't say, you know what, I partially love you and partially hate you. You say, I love you in your entirety. Yes, it's true, you have flaws like me. Yes, there's parts of you I wish were different, just as there's parts of me I wish were different, as my child, as my parent, as my spouse. But I love the full part of you, even the parts that I don't like, right? I don't like parts of you, but I love the entirety of you. And so I embrace a sponge relationship to you, v'ahavta kamocha, right? Even though there's parts I might want to reject. And there's something really powerful to knowing that your parent unconditionally loves you, even though they dislike flaws. Your life partner unconditionally loves you, even for your flaws. And we see this idea in Jewish texts around v'ahavta kamocha. That's what it means to, and love yourself. We might hate a part of ourselves, right? We all hate parts of ourselves, but we love the entirety of ourselves, right? This is a really interesting way to think about relationships where we expect loyalty. We expect unconditional love. Now, of course, there are extremes where that can be broken and a relationship needs to be severed. We need to have divorce. We need to have separation with a parent and child because of abuse or whatever the case is. We need to have boundaries. But I'm talking about relationships where we feel a deep commitment to each other, even in a very flawed relationship. And so here, we can be sponges with each other, absorb the entirety of the other, even while there's a sifting that's kind of happening over there. We're going to say, I won't critique you. I will love the entirety of you. Yes, I will name feelings that emerge from me based on things that you are and things that you do, but I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to be critical of you like a sieve. I'm going to be like a sponge in how I relate to you, absorb the entirety of you. So again, I'm not giving you a traditional source there as much as a Jewish concept and how it's played with. Okay, we have 10 minutes left. Let's hear from someone else. Thank you, Eric. Don't be shy.
I was wondering if maybe we could try to flesh out these 4 paradigms a little, excuse me, a little bit more, because it seems to me, I mean, I love the idea of it from Pirkei Avos. I love the idea of it, but it seems to me that one person's sieve is another person's, what was the one right before it? Strainer, right?
Yeah.
Because everybody's going to say, sure, keep the good stuff and let the bad stuff go.
Yeah.
But isn't it pretty subjective which is which? I mean, how do we make sense of this in a way that we can use it?
I love that. I love that. Okay, so there's a few things to say there. One is that I think this goes beyond Piaget and childhood development. In adult development as well, I think we all will say, in which situation will I be which? Right? In which situation will I be which? Who do I absolutely trust their values? Who are people in my life where 99% of what they say I can trust is coming from a good place, is coming from a place of love, is coming from a place of truth, and I'm going to lower my guard. I can hear their criticism, I can hear their ideas, and I'm going to be a sponge in that relationship because I respect them, I love them, right? And where will I be a sponge, right? Where will I be a funnel? Actually, I've got to listen to this person in my workplace, but they're a Russia. This person is evil. There's this person in society where I really trust nothing they say. Basically, anything this person says in my life or in the news or anywhere, I'm going to treat as a funnel. It's basically garbage, and I'm going to let it funnel through. Where is the strainer? Where is the strainer space? Where's the strainer space? And where's the sieve space? Where, the good and bad are so mixed up. And then get to Brett, your great question here. What are the paradigms we're going to use to determine what is going to make it and what's not going to make it? What are the questions we're going to ask ourselves to say if it stays? So let's use the chat for a minute. Anyone who's willing to chat, put in the chat over there, what is a question you do ask yourself or might ask yourself to say, is this an idea I should allow to go through the filter or to remain? Anyone want to either speak out or type in a question you might ask yourself to say, should I be skeptical of that idea and let it pass through, or should I hold on to that? What's a question in your head you would ask? Good, Steve. We're going to come back to that question in a minute. Okay. So one of the questions our tradition says to ask in regards to personal feedback, right? If you want to know where to get your feedback in the world, one of the questions around tochacha is, does this person care about me? If someone is critiquing you and they don't care about you, let it go. Let it go. If this person actually loves you, cares about you, try to listen to the feedback, right? So that's one question when it enters the personal realm. Do I want to listen to this painful message of something I might be doing wrong? Do they care about me? Is this about them or is this about me, right? Okay, then we have over here Lauren's question. Does the statement come from a fair place, a place of chesed? Right. That's another interesting question. Do I trust the intention of where this is coming from? Okay. Now, for me, some people say when it comes to theology or religious practice, I'm going to shut out other faiths. You know what? I'm just going to learn from Jewish wisdom. I don't want to gain wisdom from Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or the like. I will partner with those people in Tikkun Olam. I will be friends with those people. I will be colleagues with them. But you know what? I've decided my wisdom is going to come from Judaism. Okay, others are going to say, you know what? I can embrace those traditions also. It's true, 90% isn't going to speak to me. I don't want to go confess to a priest. I don't want to go, to mass on Christmas Eve. But I think there's some Christian wisdom there that I'm going to try to find. Or I think there's some Buddhist wisdom that's helpful to me as a Jew-boo, or not even as a Jew-boo, but as someone who likes some Buddhist ideas. Okay, we're going to come into different conclusions there. How am I going to decide which truths from another faith tradition are going to be helpful to my Jewish framework and which are going to really be a foreign intrusion to the integrity of how I live my spiritual life? Those are going to be hard. Those are going to be hard. So Nona's going to say here, does this idea ring true? Does it resonate with my core beliefs, right? Here it's going to be a question of personal integrity, a question of our own conscience, a question of our gut. Cheryl's got this question. Everything is so polarized these days that it's difficult to nuance anything. It's funneled. I think that's very true. And I think this is true, that if I hear an idea that emerges from the opposite political camp, I'm going to say, whoa, I can't trust this is true. These are people who are haters, right? And there might be times where that's not a helpful way to think about ideas. And there might be times in such a polarized ways that it might actually be helpful, where we say, you know what, there's people who, if they don't reject X, Y, Z, I can't listen to their ideas right now. So we're going to have to come to different conclusions there. I'm personally in a camp these days that I wasn't in a few years ago, where there's some ideas I'm actually not interested in reading these days. I think that they fall out beyond the pale. But I understand people want to hear from lots of different places. Whereas on a faith level, I'm very interested in hearing ideas from people of different faiths. So there's a lot more to say about that. Let's go to Steve's question here. Is Tikkun Olam both intellectual and spiritual and inseparable as such? The spiritual mean being in the moment. This is a lovely question. We're going to end here, so thank you for this, Steve. No doubt, this point we keep coming back to is that our spiritual lives are deeply interconnected with our Tikkun Olam in the objective world side. This is why I think that we should reject some form, not reject is a little too strong. We should embrace a spiritual, religious side to our social change work, and understand that without self-awareness, it can be empty. Without self-critique, we can fall into extremism. Without a spiritual nuance and a character refinement, we can miss our own work, which is interconnected with the work we want to see in the world. So I think it's deeply interconnected. And a reminder that Tikkun Olam emerges in Kabbalah from a place of the inner sparks, of the inner refinement, our own inner Tikkun Olam, which is connected with the outer world. And so I think that's absolutely right. And I think your second point about being in the moment, what we call a flow, or what we call mindfulness, what we called just a moment ago, spiritual immersion, right? That rejuvenation means immersing ourselves. This is the Shabbat experience, immersing ourselves in a Shabbat experience, right? That feels different so that we come out differently. And so friends, I give us this bracha, and I hope you'll give it back to me, that we continue to reflect on the ways we walk in the world, the ways we are in the world, so it can give us the capacity to grow and see more clearly and live more mission aligned morally and spiritually. And Miraked, sifting, is a way, and we saw through 10 different lenses how it emerges Jewishly. But just to look at this last point from Pirkei Avot, how do we learn? How do we filter? How do we hear communication? How do we receive in the world? Bracketing the question of what we put out in the world. When do I want to be a sponge? When do I want to be a funnel? When do I want to be a strainer? When do I want to be a sieve? And understanding intellectually, most commonly, from Pirkei Avot, we want to be a sieve. Accept the good and reject the bad, right? But there's other spaces we're going to have a different role. And to think about that. And when we enter a space, which filter do I want to bring into this space? Have a wonderful day. Can't wait to see you all again soon. Sending love and bracha and all good vibes. Thank you so much. All the best.
Thank you.